Now, without further ado, I'd really like to introduce you to our first speaker. And that's our first keynote, and it's entitled How to Talk to Colleagues About Universal Design for Learning. And our special guest today is Tom Tobin from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Tom Tobin is the Program Area Director of Distance Teaching and Learning at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as an internationally renowned author and speaker on issues of quality in teaching with technology, including evaluating online teaching, academic integrity, copyright, and accessibility. Tom holds a PhD in English literature, a second master's degree in information science, a professional project management certification, a master's online teaching certification, the Quality Matters Review certification, and Tom recently completed the Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies, CPACC certification. Tom tells his nieces and nephews that he is in year 42. And I think, like many of us, life is always about learning. Tom is the author of Evaluating Online Teaching, Implementing Best Practices, The Copyright Ninja, Going Alt-AC, as in Alt-EC, A Guide to Alternative Academic Careers, and Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, Universal Design for Learning in Higher Education. Tom's keynote today is entitled How to Talk with Colleagues About Universal Design for Learning. Tom, we are very glad to have you with us today, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I'm grateful that you invited me to help kick off Pathways 15. And I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's here on the live session and to those of you who will be watching the recordings later on as well. For those of us who are here on the live session, just a couple of words of housekeeping. As you heard Anthony mention earlier, this is going to be an interactive keynote session. So if you have access to the chat panel here in Zoom, I'd love it if you spark ideas, ask questions, all those kinds of things in the chat. If you do have questions that are technical, like you being able to see the interpreters, or you have concerns about audio, please use the Q&A panel, and our behind the scenes team will help you out there. By the way, I also want to acknowledge our behind the scenes team. In addition to Anthony, who is playing the role of host today, we're being supported by Darlene, Jess, Jane, Alicia, David. I missed a couple of folks as well, but they're back there making sure that things are going to go smoothly for all of us today. And also shout out to Bradley Reporting for the captions, and to Nicole and Paul, who are doing our interpreting for us today. So thank you everybody who is here to make this a successful session. On your screen is an image of me sitting in a chair, and it's the title screen for the session called How to Talk with Colleagues About Universal Design for Learning. And there's the logo for Attend and for the Pathways 15 conference. The next visual that comes up, there's a kangaroo hopping past a building on fire, and there's also a person in protective gear walking out of a COVID-19 testing tent. And there's an image of the book that I wrote about universal design for learning called Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone. So you folks in Australia, you have been through some challenging times. So between the fires and COVID-19 and all different kinds of barriers, one of the things that as disability service professionals, now it's not just the students who have disability barriers in their lives, but education, whether we're talking about further education, vocational education, or colleges and universities. We all now have similar barriers. Everyone was at home. We were teaching remotely. And I was pleased to see that earlier in November, Australia finally got to 0 new cases in a number of places. All those barriers, though, they're still around. And one of our big challenges is, how do we go beyond everyday accessibility and make our jobs as disability providers more targeted, more specific? How do we take some of the routine things that are part of our jobs every day and actually get rid of those kinds of demands so that we can spend our time really focusing on the people who need those one-to-one supports, accommodations, and adjustments. So today in this keynote, I want to go beyond what we talked about in that Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone book. Now on your screen is a vice chancellor from Southern Cross University, along with some other administrators. They're posing for photographs in their graduation regalia. They have the tams on with the tassels. They have the special robes and the sashes, and they look very official. And one of the challenges that we have is that as disability service professionals, we're often not in the same room as the people who are leading our colleges and universities. So I'd like to ask you to do a little bit of a thought experiment. I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock and we will play some music. During that time, I'd encourage you, please think of what you would say to your vice chancellor, to your campus leadership, if you had 5 minutes to talk with them. What is the message you would want them to understand about the work that you do, about the advocacy that you make at your institution? Let me get that music queued up. And if you'd like to mute the audio, I will also put when the music will be stopping. I'll put that into the chat as well. So pardon me for just a moment. Let's get 2 minutes and put that on the clock now. And please, in the chat, what's one thing you would want your vice chancellor or your campus leaders to know about your work? All right, that was 2 minutes. It goes by pretty quickly when you are thinking. So thank you everybody for the ideas and for the responses here. And I'm going to go into the chat and let me give voice to a few of the responses that we have received so far. Kay says, thank goodness all of our video content will be captioned now. Actually, I think that was a message for our captioners. Thank you. S. Smith says, what is accessible for one is not accessible for all. So a lot of our campus leaders can think that there's a one size fits all or standardized way to make things accessible for folks. Jen says, keep striving to do better. Marnie says, we work very hard to provide services, but we are significantly under-resourced. We need universal design for learning to be championed from the top down and not just by support services. H. Swain says, provide opportunities for students to develop digital literacy prior to enrolling in vocational courses. Sandy says, make UDL a priority in all courses, Make disability awareness mandatory training for all staff. Ooh, Sandy is kind of stealing some of my thunder, and I'm grateful for it. Brandon says, come and spend a day in our work area and see the challenges, expectations, and successes. I love that. Erica says, education and universal design benefits everyone. This is a message that we hope all our campus leaders hear. Marin says, we can do better for people with disabilities by improving our practice for everyone. Michelle says, a student's accessibility needs can be complex or simple and anything in between. There is no one size fits all. I love the theme that we're building here. Elaine says, if you put universal design before a new brand design, you will attract more students. Ooh, and Elaine is talking my language because I want to share some secrets with you about how to talk to your campus leaders, and this is one of them. Shelley says, I would ask them to enshrine inclusive practices in curriculum and assessment policy. It's a good request. Sharon says students learn in a variety of different ways and demonstrate their knowledge in diverse ways. Our challenge is to accommodate all these different learning styles to benefit society as a whole. Let's see, Deb says, I'd like them to know how important it is that they practice inclusive or universal design by always using the microphone, describing PowerPoint slides, including accessibility needs for every university event. They can lead the way by demonstrating how to do it. Let's see, Linda says it's about people empowering others and ensuring safe, inclusive access for all. Dallas says our workload as access and inclusion advisors is increasing. It would be good to see funding increased for practitioners and the adoption of inclusive practices across the board. Let's see, a couple more here. Priyanka says cultural diversity must be acknowledged and addressed in accessibility provision. Jody says accessibility is not an add-on, but a foundation. And Marion says that hearing from the workers at the coal face is vital, and that only by realizing we are or can be all working together will we get the best outcomes for organizations and those who engage with them. And there's a bunch more here, and I'm going to skip down a couple of bits here because I'm seeing a lot of themes. Not one size fits all. Accessibility provides equity. It's a foundation of the diversity, equity, and inclusion that we talk about in a wider way. And accessibility is challenging at times for all students. And there's a lot of messages from folks like Belinda and Katie about universal design, and Rhonda talking about just wanting to give our leaders the message about how valuable inclusive work and accessibility work is. So thank you everyone for the ideas, and let's keep these ideas coming. I want to make you two promises as we go through our time today. One, I am totally interruptible. So if something we are talking about sparks an idea or a story for you, please post it in the chat and we will pause and give voice to it. Two, I am going to walk the accessibility talk. I'm not only going to describe what's on the screen, but I would also like to give all of you choices about how you can interact. So not just the text-based chat today. If you would like to be part of the audio conversation, please go under participants and use the raise hand feature. We will acknowledge you and we can unmute you and bring you onto the live microphone if you have a comment there as well. And we can take a limited number of those too. But thank you everyone for creating that 5-minute message. And I see a few of them still coming in. Bobby just posted one. Students with disabilities eventually become staff with disabilities. Universities need to be holistic from day one of people's academic careers. And I love that you are still thinking about what would you say to your campus leader if you had those 5 minutes. On the screen is a new image, and it's the first idea that I would like to suggest for all of you. Universal Design for Learning is primarily an advocacy model. And on the screen is Australian actress Sharina Clanton. She is speaking through a bullhorn at an Australia Day protest for Aboriginal rights. And she has a fist up in the air, and she's getting her message across. And what I'd like to suggest is that universal design for learning in most colleges and universities in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, in Australia, universal design for learning is seen primarily as the responsibility of faculty members. The people who are teaching the courses are the ones who are supposed to be making everything more accessible for those students. One of the challenges is that we do not often train our information technology colleagues, our media services colleagues, and yes, our disability services colleagues as well, in good inclusive design practices. Now, I know that many of you know what universal design for learning is. I'd like to give you a different frame for it than you may have seen before, so that when you are having conversations with your instructor colleagues, your support staff colleagues, and yes, your campus leaders, that you can make the argument to help make your job more effective. So here's what I mean. On your screen now is a group of students who are seated around a table. Many of them have laptops open. One of them is standing at the table and pointing, and everyone is looking in that direction. And this is a group of students studying in a college. On the screen are some words also, Universal Design for Learning. And this is the official definition from CAST, C-A-S-T, the Center for Applied Special Technology in Boston. These are the neuroscientists who came up with the Universal Design for Learning framework. And what they discovered was that when we humans learn anything, whether we are 6 years old or 60, we have to activate 3 different chemical pathways in the brain. Now, I'm not going to go into the acetylcholine uptake pathway through the hippocampus, but we have to have multiple ways to get engaged and stay engaged. We need a why for the learning to happen. Also, multiple means of representing information. This is what everyone else thinks about when we say accessibility. This is having captions for our videos. This is text transcripts for our audio podcast information. This is alternative text for still images. And having more than one way that people can practice with, take action, and express their skills. So, when there's only one way for people to get engaged, take in information, or show what they know, then we've closed off lots of alternatives and options for folks. And here is one of the biggest challenges for disability service providers. When we get to work with students with disability barriers in their lives, most of those students, if the learning interactions were designed more inclusively, most of those students probably would not need our help or need as much of our help as we normally do. And we'll think in a couple of seconds about how we can change that. Now, before you start going back to your colleagues and saying, oh, let me share with you the official definition of UDL, let's consider this secret information just for us. Don't share this official definition, please, with your colleagues, because just like talking about neuroscience and chemical pathways in the brain, their eyes will kind of glaze over. Instead, what I'd like to suggest, now the image on the screen is exactly the same, except there's +1. In the book, I talk about approaching universal design for learning at a starting point, which is +1 thinking. And when we think about +1 thinking, if there is one way for an interaction to happen now, think about the way that students interact with materials and content. That's where most people start. But also, how do they interact with one another? How do they interact with instructors, with support staffers like tutors or librarians? And how do they interact with the wider world as part of their studies? If there is one way for those interactions to happen now, make one more way. That's the plus one of plus one design. It's not full on universal design for learning. It is a way to get people to start that isn't threatening to them and they can get their brains around it. So when you talk to your colleagues and you say, here's how you can be more inclusive in the way that you teach, talk about plus one design. Okay, let's do another thought experiment. On your screen is a classroom full of students, and they are all attending a lecture. They are all looking off camera toward a speaker, and one of the students is looking directly at us, and she has a piece of paper that she appears to be handing to us. So I'm not going to put any music or time on, but I'd like to hear your ideas in the chat here. Now, imagine that one of your instructor colleagues has a student in class and the student has gotten the piece of paper from Disability Services. And that student hands the piece of paper to the instructor and says, I need time and a half on my tests. I need to take tests in a controlled environment, and I need someone to be there while I'm taking the assessments to read questions out loud to me. And what should your teaching colleague say to that student? So let's take a couple of seconds, just put it into the chat and imagine for yourself for a second, what should your instructor colleague say to that student with that piece of paper? I'll give a couple of seconds for things to roll into the chat here. This should be a real quick, right first thing that comes to your mind response here. And C.S. Hilton says, why isn't equity embedded in the fabric of our university? Ooh, good question, and we will come to that. Belinda says, the instructor should say, sure, no problem. Beck says, they should say, no worries. Priyanka says, happy to support. Suzanne says, yes, I love that answer. Leslie says, let's get this sorted then. Kay says, sure, no problem. Debbie says, sure, and is there anything else I can assist with? Lindell says, great, thanks for letting me know. Kate says, thank you. This is really important for me to know. If there's anything else, let me know. Holly says, not a problem at all. Raul says, what support would you like? Sandy says, sure, I can help you. And Dallas says, what's the best way we can accommodate this for you? And lots of other responses have come in along those lines. So this is what our instructor colleagues should say. Now, I'm going to change the screen only slightly. The same image with all the students attending the lecture, but it's a new question. Now put in the chat, how might our instructor colleagues actually feel when they get that piece of paper? Take a second and post your response, the first thing that comes to mind. Kate says, oh God, more work for me. Beth says, oh, I need help. Michelle says, I'm scared. Sandra says, I don't have time for this. Suzanne says, stressed. Raul, how am I going to do this? Priyanka says, depends, but some feel overwhelmed. Lauren says, concerned, they don't know what to do next. Overwhelmed. Oh no, not again. I love the one from Sandy. It's not my problem. Go see Disability Services. And Belinda says, what am I supposed to do? How do I do this? Sandra says, this is not my job. Jeremy says, and I'll say this as phonetically as I can. And Kay Sellers says, I may need some advice with this. Marnie says, all of the above responses at the same time. And so what I love is that when I asked, what should our colleague say? Everybody thought about it for a couple of seconds. And, you know, it took a couple of maybe 30 seconds for the conversation really to get going. Then when I said, how might our colleagues actually feel? That chat lit up before I could even start reading it. And you folks are still rolling through in the chat with the emotions here. This is the key to why universal design for learning is not more widespread at our colleges, universities, vocational, and further education programs. And it is also the key for how to talk to our colleagues. Regardless of whether we say the right things as instructors, and regardless of what the emotions are that are inside those decisions, we make our decisions with our emotions first. And when we, as disability officers, talk with our colleagues, they can make an essential mental mistake. And that mistake is that when we say inclusive design, what they often hear is people with disabilities. They think we are advocates only for the people whom we directly serve in disability services. And so our department chairs, our campus leaders, our colleagues in the classroom, when we say, let's be more inclusive, they can think, well, I only have a small percentage of students with disability barriers in my classes to begin with. And Jeremy has it right in the chat. He says they think other, it's just for those people over there. And when they make that essential mental mistake, they think, why would I do all of that work? Because let's face it, individual accommodations, one change, one time for one person, that is labor and resource intensive. And they think, why would I do all that work? I'm just going to wait until I get that piece of paper. So when we talk up to our colleagues, I'd like to share two different models that help them to be more inclusive. And in so doing, that makes our jobs more targeted, and it helps us to actually remove work that we probably shouldn't be doing in the first place. So on your screen, the image is changing. There is a food service worker in a hairnet and gloves in front of a tray full of fruit, and she is grabbing one piece of fruit with a long tool to take it out of the tray. What I'd like to suggest is that if we can reduce the number of routine accommodations, then we're actually giving ourselves more time for for helping the folks who need the individual supports. We can take away some of the work that we do without negating the fact that we will never be out of jobs. There will always be a need for individual supports and accommodations for students with disabilities. But the more that we can help our students to do for themselves or work in environments where they have choices and options, the less we have to do those routine tasks. How many times, for example, have you stamped a form, time and a half on the test? Here, give this person extra time, give that person extra time. It can be a little challenging. Let's get into another thought exercise after a couple of seconds here. Now on your screen is an image of a woman at home. She's sitting on her couch. Her young son is asleep on her lap. He's cradled up with a stuffed animal. She has a notebook open on her lap and she's writing in it with a pen. There's a textbook open next to her and there's a backpack with a laptop. The argument that we can use with our instructor colleagues especially is that when they design their interactions to give students more choices about how they get engaged, about how they take in information, and about how they show their skills, they are actually giving their students more time for study and practice. This was true before the pandemic, but it's especially true now when our students are remote from us and they are caring for their own children who might be going to school remotely. They have more responsibilities as students. So our big challenge is to help them navigate the 24 hours of the day. If we are able to, as instructors, as disability support staff, as other support staff like technology and media people, if we can design interactions that help students to find more time during their day for studying, then we are reducing the burden on our disability service officers and on our instructors. Let me share a couple of ways to actually do this. On your screen now are a number of Australian students who have just graduated from their undergraduate degrees. They are smiling, they're in their caps and gowns, and they are throwing their caps up into the air. And on the screen are three words: persistence, retention, and satisfaction. Your instructor colleagues will likely not make any changes unless they have a business reason to do so. And people who are department chairs or campus leaders, what you can do instead of talking about how to benefit students with disability barriers, talk about how to help students to stay engaged in class. More students will be there on the first day of class, and they will persist to take the final examination. How to retain students better. More students will take a course from me, and then they'll come back next term and take a course from Professor Anthony. More students are satisfied with their experience of their educations, and they're more likely to recommend our institutions to their friends. This is, oh, I have to be careful when I say this, especially at a disability advocacy conference. I am an advocate for the rights of our students with disability barriers in their lives. And I have stopped talking first or only about disability barriers. In fact, I have stopped talking to my colleagues about accessibility. I chop the end of the word off and I talk about access, no matter why. And by doing so, I'm no longer just talking about our students who navigate using a cane, or the students with hearing aids, or the students who use wheelchairs. I'm talking about all of our students. I'm talking about students whose main form of access is their smartphone. Talking about students who have to park outside of businesses because that's where they get their Wi-Fi. And when we talk about access, suddenly it's an argument that others on campus and others whom we work with, they don't perceive us as advocating for a narrow slice of our students, but they hear us as advocating for everybody. And Lauren just posted into the chat, our current buzzword relating to this is student experience. I'm already trying to reframe what I'm doing with the student experience frame. Oh, I love that. Thank you for putting that into the conversation. So let's talk about UDL practices. On your screen is a hallway with a series of doors. All of the doors are colored white, except for one, which is colored yellow. And these UDL practices, when we talk with our instructor colleagues about making their interactions more engaging by using multiple means to keep people engaged, this can be as simple as asking instructors to put time estimates on their activities. So if an instructor wishes students to read a journal article, how long will that probably take? If the instructor asks students to do a practice quiz or do a lab work piece, how long will that take? The unscientific way to do that is to do the activity yourself as the instructor or the facilitator, and then give your students an estimate of half again as much time. So if it took you 30 minutes to read something, tell your students it'll take them 45. If it took you 15 minutes to do a practice quiz, tell your students 22, 23 minutes. It's not a science, but just having those estimates can help students with time management and executive function. And the same is true when we think about the +1 for representing information. Tell your instructor colleagues to look for the places where things don't go the way that they have planned over and over and over. Where are those pinch points? Where are the places where students ask the instructor the same question by email 700 times? Where are the places where the entire class worth of students gets the same thing wrong on the test or the quiz, and then the instructor has to reteach? Those are the places where instructors can do a little bit of inclusive design and actually take things off their plates, and in so doing, reduce your own workload as a disability support person as well. So on your screen now is a set of stairs that also has a ramp along it. And a woman is pushing another person in a wheelchair up the ramp and eventually going to go all the way up the stairs. Eagle-eyed viewers will also spot the cat on the stairs as well. But this is a really important concept to get across to our instructor and campus leader colleagues. And this is the idea of doing things for our students versus designing agency into the interactions that we have. And one of our colleagues mentioned this in the chat earlier, that when we are doing for our students, chances are our students would much rather have the agency, have the opportunity to do for themselves if only the environments were designed to allow them to do so. And this is such an important concept when we talk to our colleagues that I'd like to read a quotation that's on the screen now from Elizabeth Gregory. She says, "A system that focuses only on disorder and individualized interventions misses the opportunity to address trauma through relational repair in every interaction." What Dr. Gregory means here is that we work in institutions that often see the people whom we serve through a medical deficit model. And if we can start talking about the entirety of our student body, everyone together facing common barriers. So in this way, the pandemic was, I don't want to say a blessing, but there is a way to use the pandemic or a fire or any other thing that presents the same barrier to everyone as an opportunity to advocate for how to lower those barriers at the level of the systems that we work within. So when you talk to your instructor colleagues, when you talk to your service colleagues, when you talk to your campus leaders, think first about the barriers that everyone perceives and everyone struggles with, and then start thinking about what those possible solutions might look like. On your screen now is a number of folks from the Koori Deaf Mob at a recent conference. And when we talk about universal design for learning in disability support services, one of the things that we are all very good at is we are all good at making our own materials, services, and interactions as frictionless as we can make them, as multiple as we can make them. So one of our strengths that we can share with the rest of our campuses is we can help to train our colleagues in where do you put your effort first. So universal design for learning, multiple means of staying engaged, giving people choices about how they connect with our instructors or our support staff colleagues, and giving our students choices about how they continue to keep with us and how they stay motivated. Multiple means of representing information. This one we probably don't have to teach too much about, but it goes beyond just making things accessible on our websites. One of the things that I learned as I was doing my homework for this conference is that even though there is the disability law in Australia, a lot of the supports that we offer don't have the force of legal requirement. And that is actually it was the case in Canada until last year, believe it or not. And it was the case in the United Kingdom until only 6 years ago as well. And so being able to make the business argument to say that more accessible and more inclusive interactions means that we keep our students better. This is the UDL argument that disability service professionals can use. So one of our big challenges is the freshman cliff. If we take in 2,000 first-year students in our universities or our vocational programs or further ed, then by the time they are second-year students, there's usually only about 1,500 of them left. Where did our 500 students go? The number one reason is economic. UDL kind of can't touch that. But the second most common reason is time management and universal design for learning, giving people options, choices about how they take in information and demonstrate their skills. That's all about working against time pressures and the clock. So let me show you one last model for how to talk to each other and your colleagues about universal design for learning. On your screen, there are 3 students sitting at an outdoor cafe table. One of them has his laptop open, another one is drinking coffee, and another one is talking with the other 2. And I'd like to suggest that there are 4 different ways that we can make our materials and interactions interactive, better designed, and inclusive, according to UDL. So when you are talking with your colleagues will make one more mental mistake. And that is, they will think that making content accessible is accessibility. And frankly, in most of our work, we tend to foster that impression sometimes as well, that it's just making alternative formats of materials, turning this PDF into a spoken word content or something like that. But there's actually 4 different types of interactions that if you can ask your instructor colleagues to make them more accessible, then your instructors are actually saving themselves time and effort. So how do students interact with the content and materials, but also where do they interact with each other? So if you have your instructors who are using a learning management system, or they've got a blog for all of their students, or they're using different kinds of social media, how do you make those interactions with one another more multi-format? Give students options for how they take part in text or by putting a hand up and using the audio function. And one of the big challenges for accessibility is that it can be people can get the wrong idea that if we give students choices between speaking on the microphone or using the chat, and then everybody just decides to use the chat, is that a failure? No, that's students had the choice and they all chose one or the other. So as we go through and think about giving students options for how they interact with each other, giving that +1 means that we as disability officers will have to make fewer individual accommodations in regard to interpersonal communications. The third part is, how do students interact with the institution where we serve? This goes way beyond just the classroom. How do students interact with the library, with registration, with financial aid, with all of the different services that we offer, tutoring, mental health counseling, you name it? If there's more than one way for students to have those interactions, we are more likely to keep more of those students with ourselves as students. They say that it costs, I think it's about $10 per student in order to do the marketing and to pay the staff in order to bring a student in to start studying with us at our institutions. And then once the student is a first-year student, it only costs about $2 every year in order to keep that student from year to year in terms of support services. But when students leave us it costs another $10 to go out and get another student, right? So it actually makes much better business sense to be able to hang on to the students whom we already have. And worldwide, we've already done our due diligence trying to find students, returning adults, non traditional learners, people who have some college but haven't finished a degree in our service areas. We've already reached out to those folks. Universal Design for Learning allows us better to hang on to the students whom we already have. And the last place to think about when you talk with your colleagues is ask them, how do they ask their students to interact with the wider world? How do they get their students out there communicating with people in the field, learning from real examples, hearing about cases, interacting with businesses, colleagues, partners who are actually doing the things that your students are learning how to do as aspiring professionals? Now that we are working remotely with a number of our students, this is doubly important to give students options for how they interact beyond just our courses and our institutions. So when you are talking with your colleagues, you can go beyond even individual inclusion plans. And on your screen now is another group of 4 students, and they are all looking at a tablet that one of the students is displaying to the other ones, and they're having a conversation in a study group. So Priyanka has a thing in the chat here. She says, we introduced different ways for students to interact with student support: chat via WhatsApp, video chat via Zoom or BlueJeans, telephone, email, whatever is suitable to them. So that's an excellent version of +1. And I love that you're starting to think about how you are already working in these veins at your institution. And I'm going to ask in a couple of minutes if we can wrap up by talking about what we're going to take away. But think about those individual inclusion plans. When I was doing my homework to get ready to talk with everybody, I had a chance to speak with 10 or 11 of your colleagues, and every single person talked about coming into disability services because they wanted to make a difference in the lives of students, and because they saw that there was such a need for reforming the structures of our institutions. And a lot of us feel a little bit powerless and a little bit overwhelmed, frankly. And this is true here in the United States as well. There's not enough people to take care of all of the needs that we perceive. But that doesn't mean that we're doing it wrong. That just means that more and more people from more and more various backgrounds are coming to school with us. So we might not have been as busy as now years ago, but that's actually a good sign. It means that we are more welcoming to a wider variety of people from more various backgrounds. So, when we start talking about individual inclusion plans, making one change one time for one person, it's useful that when we talk to the instructor and we say, here's the inclusion plan for this student, and if you were to take these 2 actions, if you were to give your students a choice about how they show what they know for this test, where I'm asking you to put an accommodation in place. If you gave your students just a +1 choice here, you wouldn't have this student needing the accommodation, and it would make things more smooth for you as the instructor and for me as the disability services person. What you don't say to your colleague, excuse me, is that conversation, if the instructor takes you up on that and starts making more inclusive design in his or her interactions, then you can focus your efforts less on those individual, here is a need for a test, and more with the folks who have those accommodations that we will never be able to get rid of or design our way around. So, on the screen now is a takeaway meal. You can see, I think, some pita bread and some sauce. There's some cut up vegetables in the back, but in the foreground is the takeaway liter margarita made to order. That's my favorite part of the takeaway. But that's not the kind of takeaway that I want to ask you about now. We're kicking off the Pathways 15 conference, and I've seen some beautiful sessions coming up on accommodations, universal design for learning. I'd love to hear, let's put two more minutes back on the clock. And I'd love to hear in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we'll acknowledge you and you can come on the live microphone. But what's one thing that you will take away from our time in this keynote? It could be something you want to try. It could be a question that you want to address by this and other sessions, or it could be something that you are already doing and we've underlined it as important. Let me get some music going here and we'll put 2 minutes on the clock for everybody. Let's see, we had some blues there. Let's see, I'm working with Australian colleagues. Let's go surf this time. All right, the music is ended and 2 minutes goes by pretty quick. And let me just run through some of the responses that we've received so far. Suzanne, Belinda, and Priyanka have said that their takeaway is the +1 concept itself. What I'd love for you to do is when you talk with your colleagues, make it simple. Don't think that there is such a thing as too much simplification. Get people to take an action. And if that action is something that they can understand and put their brain around, all the better, because one of the challenges about why only 10 to 15% of instructors worldwide have adopted inclusive teaching methods of any kind is that they see that maybe the law says that all their videos have to be captioned, and they see that they've already made 35 2-minute videos, and they think, I have to have those captioned by yesterday? And they see the enormity of the task that could be in front of them. They suffer from analysis paralysis, and they don't even start. So simplify the heck out of things for folks, help them take one step that shows that they can save some time, save some effort, make things smoother for themselves and their students. Jane says, I really like the idea of getting academics to indicate how long activities will take. This also means that for those instructors who keep adding things now that we're teaching remotely and they just add more and more and more work, it gets them to take a pause point and think about the workload that they are assigning to their students, which is also the workload that they are assigning to themselves as well. I don't know about you, but the last time I taught a course and I was under a mountain of grading, I sort of cursed the fact that I had designed the course with so much to grade in it. It is a problem of our own devising. Debbie says, I like the +1 approach, meet people where they are, make it easy to remember, and challenge us to step it up one step at a time. Cool. Beck says, time estimates. Meredith says, more choice for students on how they can interact with information 24 hours a day. The more that we can take the clock out of the equation, the better off we're going to be, and the less busy work or everyday work we will be doing as disability support professionals. Leslie says access for everyone. H. Swain says time estimates. Megan says access instead of accessibility. I hate to say it because I'm an advocate for disability services myself. And when I lead with my students with disability, then people hear me with 10% of their ears, so to speak. But when I lead with access, people pay attention because it's something that they can see affects them themselves. Fiona says designing into rather than doing for students. That's actually something that we can do individually as disability support professionals. And you're going to hear a couple of really good presentations coming up in a day or two on this exact topic. So wait for that. I really enjoyed seeing that on the program. Joanna says, include inclusive design into lesson plans from the outset. Yes, absolutely. A couple more votes for the 4 interactions and time estimates. Equal access for everyone, +1, couple of votes for that. Allowing students options and promoting independence to the extent that we possibly can. Lower those barriers for our students. And that means that we're actually lowering the amount of knocking on doors that we have to do, metaphorically speaking, as disability support professionals as well. Beth says, my takeaway is ask colleagues what their pinch points are when delivering their courses. Yeah, where do students ask that question 700 times? Where do students always get something wrong and you end up having to reteach? As disability support professionals, we can actually help lower the workload for our colleagues by helping them see where those pinch points are. Sandy says, when writing to academics, change the wording in the email. Access instead of accessibility or disability. Love the +1. So we've got a lot of votes for +1 and time estimates. Amanda says, I will use more opportunities when I have one-on-one conversations with academics about individual student support needs to suggest more universal inclusive practices for all students. You're actually making your job easier by helping make their job easier. I love the way that you're framing that. Joanna says, despite the dirty feeling of have to talk about money or time allocations, it is arguments that do with money that might make the difference in the end to convince colleagues to change practice. This is especially true when you get your vice chancellor's ear for 5 minutes, and it's why we started with that thought exercise. S. Smith says more choice for all students assists with retention. That's something that your campus leaders will pay attention to. Sean says knowing that support can be multi-stage, including trainers and support staff. That's right. Cool. Good takeaway. Tracy says eliminate routine adjustments so we can focus on the students with more complex needs. That should be one of our mantras in disability support areas. Karen says, consider how colleagues feel when presented with an access plan. Even if they say the right things, acknowledge those emotions and help them to understand how the work that you do can help them lower barriers for themselves too. Awesome. Geetha says, it was heartening when you said we're busier because more people from a variety of backgrounds are actually coming to university. The fact that we're swamped means that we're doing something right. Yes, absolutely. A couple of votes for +1 and access versus accessibility. Some pinch points ideas here. Lauren says, using remote learning examples to broaden the conversation to benefit all students, not just being seen as advocates for disability. Viter says, encouraging students to reach out to the wider world via meetup events, adding to their learning with real life experiences. We've got some more votes for +1, time on task, students at the center of work and support plans. Let's see, satisfaction. Here we go. Michelle says nirvana would be reducing the number of routine accommodations, spread the access philosophy for everyone. And that's a wonderful way stop our conversation here. C.S. Hilton says a rising tide lifts all boats. That's true. And this is a great way to end. Steph Wiltshire says, as a student attending to better understand how to make the learning experience better for myself and others, and a potential future career, I will take away how kind and inspiring it is to talk about matters in this way, and how much more exciting it is to get into learning with this attitude with many. The +1 attitude is great for a lot of situations too. And I want to say thank you, everybody. This was an inspiring conversation, and I'm taking away a lot of ideas from all of you as well. On the screen now is the title slide again. I will say thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the virtual Pathways 15 conversation. I'll turn it back over to Anthony. Thank you so much.